Hey friends, thanks so much for tuning into the Trinity Happy Hour. We are super excited about this week's episode. The past week, James and I sat down with Dr. C. Baxter Kruger and John MacMurray after the Rethink God conference that was just hosted here in Richmond. Rethink God had a lot of great material, a lot of good talks. If you want to check those videos out, they're on the church's website at richmondgrace.com.
By the way, if you're from Richmond or in the Richmond, Virginia area, and you want to come out and have this conversation in person, this is the church that Kester and I go to. And so on any given Sunday, you'll likely find us there unless one of us is out of town, but come on by. And again, that website is richmondgrace.com. It'll have all that information on there for addresses and times.
So we sat down with Dr. C. Baxter Kruger, who is an author, speaker, and all-around pretty good guy. He's written a number of books that we're big fans of, including The Shack Revisited and Across All Worlds, Jesus Inside Our Darkness. Those were awesome. And he just came out with a new book called Patmos, which is either released now or will be released soon, which is a fictional semi-autobiographical tale about a guy who meets John, the Apostle John, on the island of Patmos. We also were joined by John MacMurray, who's a speaker and teacher and another all-around cool guy. And we grabbed both of them after the conference, so this is after 3 straight days of talking and lecturing and teaching and meeting people. So we had what you might call high context for this conversation. We had been talking about God and the gospel and religion and life and sharing stories all weekend, and then we jumped into this conversation. So hopefully there's not too many assumptions or too much context that you're missing out on. We want this discussion to be super accessible because we talked about a lot of really important things. We talked about the meaninglessness we can often find in life. We talked about cosmic loneliness. We talked about sharing your beliefs, why we believe the way we do. We talked about our own faith and life journeys and the pains and triumphs and struggles. We talk about Jesus and his centrality, importance, and exclusive activity that brings us into relationship with the Father. What else do we talk about, James?
That's really what it comes down to, is that if we're sharing stories, or let me just say it like this, if we're not sharing stories and experiences, but we're just talking information and we're just talking doctrine and what the right doctrine is, that's not really going to get us too far. It's good to have those things, and I'm not thinking or saying anything bad about that, but if it doesn't actually do anything for you in your life, if it doesn't change you to live life a certain way that has meaning and has fruit in it, then it is meaningless. It's pointless to go on Google every day or YouTube and look up all these, cool, profound, wise sayings and sermons and lectures, and then it just does nothing for you. And I think that's what makes this episode so great, is that John MacMurray and Baxter Kruger are sharing those experiences very much on a personal level. And so if you know of these guys, then I think that you're going to already understand the context of this conversation. But if you don't know them, what you're getting is these are 2 guys who are in the second half of life, who have been through years and years of studying theology, living it out in their marriage and family and friendships and church life and all that kind of stuff. And they're telling you from a personal level what it's like to lose meaning in life, what it's like to lose faith in what you believe for a certain period of time, and then find something new that actually does give you meaning and things like that. And it's certainly stuff that you and I, Kester, are going through in our lives, and who knows how that'll pan out as well. But what I enjoy about this episode is that I get to hear these 2 guys tell me so much about their experience and give me a reminder of what I could look forward to.
So before we let this intro drag on too long, I guess we'll jump right into it. But I do want to pull out one thing Baxter said, that if you don't hear anything, hear this, that we all have paradigms or differing worldviews or ways about thinking about ourselves or the world around us. And within the sphere of religion, we often argue about lots of things and what's true and isn't true. And with the secular world or the modern world or the this or that philosophical idea, there are dialogues going on and oftentimes arguments about who's right and who's wrong and what's true and what's not true. And Baxter nails it down so well when he said, the question is going to be, who is alive? Not who's most rational, not who's got the best proof text if you're religious from this or that, but who's actually alive. So let's jump right into it, talking to two guys who are alive.
Fully alive, then fully pumped.
It thrills me to know that what I've spent my life, I thought I was alone. I mean, I was not carving out a theology to hand on that people would love. I'm trying to figure out life for me. I mean, I'm reading the New Testament. Jesus, what does this mean? The truth shall set you free. I'm not trying to figure out what does this mean to James. I'm like, I want to know what this means. And one of the two great shocks in my life. One was I didn't know that asking questions would get me in such trouble. Because when you ask a question, the pose is up. Like if we meet every Sunday for 2 years, and so I stand up and say, hey guys, gals, Jesus says the truth shall set you free. What does this mean? And I'm not saying that in order to condemn you. I don't mean that. I mean, like, I want to know, what does this mean? Because I don't think I'm free. What I wasn't prepared for was that everybody in the room feels like exposed. It feels like you're condemning me because, and it's got nothing to do with anybody else in the room. So I didn't realize the condemnation that was going to come from just raising honest questions, from just being naive Southern boy who's reading the New Testament that we read every single Sunday, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Sunday youth group, Wednesday night. What does Jesus mean when he says, I have come to give you life? Like, that's a great question. I want to know what the answer to that is. Well, to ask the question means that we don't have it. And if we're all posing that we do, that creates conflict. So I did not see that coming. And I'm talking about over a 30-year period of my journey. I didn't see it coming. I also did not see coming the fact, John MacMurray is sitting here together. I didn't see that when I wrote Across All Worlds, I didn't think anybody else had asked those questions. I didn't know what that book would mean to John MacMurray and how he and I would instantly become best friends because of that book, because I didn't know he'd been struggling with the same questions. So there's this worldwide phenomenon of people that have been in the same square, asking the same questions, yearning for truth. I think about my friends in South Africa. Craig Bowes emails me. He thinks I'm from South Africa because my name's Kruger. He wants to know about union with Christ. He says, I've been trying to understand this my whole life. I came across something you said, came across some of your lectures. Would you be willing to come and talk with me? He didn't even know I was from Mississippi. He thought I was from South Africa. So I said, sure, I would come. What do we need to do? It worked out, and we ended up being there. And I thought, I never knew that all this wrestling and thinking and digging and reading, that there were other people that would benefit from this. And that's been my great joy. So that's counterbalanced the criticism. My great joy has been, I get to meet John MacMurray. I get to meet Paul Young. We get to spend our lives together and talk about, and John says, what do you think about this? And John, what do you think about this? And John, I'm like, I can't believe somebody else is thinking about this. So it's that part of it has been astounding to me. It still is.
Right, it's like going to perichoresis last year was such a joy, mainly because I was like, oh, I'm not alone anymore. For us, he was going through this first, and then we started being friends and hanging out more, and then he's taking me through that journey. And like 4 months into that journey, I finally realized, I was like, you had to go through this alone by yourself, reading all these books, getting your thinking kind of sideswiped by this new way of thinking, this new theology or whatever.
It's new.
Not
It's
new.
not new.
Right, yeah, it's new to us, but it's not exactly new.
No.
But I was like, that must have been one of the loneliest times, like, in your head. Yeah, he had it.
Yeah, it was good. I was afraid to talk to her about this stuff. I cornered James and forced him to talk about it. When we talked about it, you'd be like, yeah, people have different views on things, and that's okay. Yeah. We can all... You were very pro-unity in the body, and I was like, I'm going to corner somebody.
Because I was pro-unity. It was more so I was afraid of people debating and then, like, breaking up their friendships over it, because I've seen that happen in my life. So it's more of more of kind of like an insecurity in a way, that I was dodging those hard conversations to have when it comes to theology.
I think the question of loneliness is very important, because it has, for me, and I'm sure for John, and you speak to this, but the first 20 years of this for me was incredibly lonely. I thought again and again and again, people would say to me, better not to be born than to have than to lead a little one astray. And what you're saying is heresy, and you are the Antichrist, and you are a heretic. And I had one elder tell me 20 years ago, Baxter, you do not have the gift of teaching. You are not edifying the body of Christ. You are doing more harm than good. And I went back to my office that night, and I closed the door, and I got on my knees and I prayed, and I said, Jesus, I don't want to be that man. Let me go do something else. And I cried and I prayed, and I said, I'm not ever going to speak again. I don't want to lead anybody astray. I'm trying to find my way. And Jesus says, what makes you think they're not already lost and already astray? Do you think I'm leading you? And I'm like, Jesus, you lead me. I'm following you. And I'm not going to open my mouth unless you tell me to open my mouth. Because, I mean, it's not like you're raking in millions of dollars here and you got to keep the gig going. I mean, this is like, there's no money in this. It's not like a great way to make a living and take care of 3 kids and send them to college and then to professional school and take care of everything. I mean, John and I both can testify that. I speak because I have heard Jesus in that pain speak to me and tell me who I am and what he wants me to do. And I heard it so convincingly that it outweighs all negation. And when I say fear is not the right word, I am much more concerned about respecting Jesus' commission of me than I am about the elders' condemnation of me. Because he's going to meet Jesus. He has, in fact, gone on and met Jesus. And I'm like, I got to learn how to stand in that and figure out which way I'm supposed to go and move forward. And that's what I've done. And now I didn't know that there were people all over the world. I mean, all over the world. All over. That are in the exact same place. And they have not been given the luxury or the particular struggle that John and I have, which is time to go and read and dig and think. And T.F. Torrance said to me in 1988, when I was doing my dissertation on his thought, his understanding of knowing God, and I was wrapping up my dissertation, I'd read everything that T.F. Torrance had ever written 2 or 3, 4 times, some things 5 and 6 times. It's like 300 articles, 30 books, all kind of recorded speeches and stuff. And I'd worked and worked and worked. And I sat down with him and I said, Professor Torrance, it strikes me that in all of this great, fantastic work, you are at heart an evangelist. And he said, you're exactly right. He said, I grew up on the mission field in Sichuan, China, moved back to Scotland when I was 13 in order to get my education. I was going to go back and be a missionary with my father. He said, but the Lord called me to evangelize the foundations of the Western mind. And I just like, whoa. And then the last thing he said to me when I was standing at his door to leave, and he had a way of looking at you that sifted you. I mean, that man, I've never met a human being that had that kind of exousia. There was no in that brother. He was about Jesus, and if you're not, you better watch out because you're fixing to get withered. And he looked at me and he said, Baxter, he said, study the Bible, study the fathers. But at some point, you must stand up and tell people what you think and what you believe. I didn't understand the gravity of it. I knew it was an important thing, but now, all these years later, I realized what he was saying is that you can spend your life hiding, quoting MacDonald and Lewis and me and Bart and Athanasius and Paul and John, and you can spend your life quoting these people. But it's not real until you stand up in the crucible and you tell people what you believe and you're willing to stand there. And that's when change happens. That's when there's like power in the room. Yeah. So, I mean, John, what do you think? Man, has that been your experience too?
Yeah, there's similarities, but there's differences too. My journey into a different pond happened much later in life than you. You went to seminary, and then from seminary you started going a direction, and you ended up going to Scotland because of that. So you were still pretty young. For me, the journey didn't start. I mean, obviously my entire life, everybody's life is a journey. Sure. And I believe God is always working and doing his best for every man. That would be a George MacDonald quote. I believe that. That's a pretty big deal to me. And so I believe that he's always been working in my life. And I can look back and see that obviously much easier over a period of time. But things didn't start, they started changing with a different speed, so to speak. You know, there were these really small steps, and and I wasn't even aware of what was changing and even what my questions were. But as the questions began to mount, as they became bigger, and the burden of that became heavier, and the dissatisfaction with the answers that I had been given and then turned around and taught grew. You know, I'm in my late 30s and into my 40s when I really start saying, wait a minute, I've been at this long enough now that this isn't working. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So that part is different. I think I had more baggage because I had more years thinking and trying to sustain a certain way of looking than Baxter did. I had more vested in it, in personally, in terms of my own identity. I had more history and relationship in it. And I've had a lot of friends that have never called me, have never asked me one question about, what do you think now? Why, you know, they just hear things and they don't even bother. And what's really sad about that to me is it's guilt by association. It's like one of the oldest things in the book. Oh, so MacMurray's hanging out with Paul Young now and Baxter Kruger, so we know what he believes. You don't know what I believe. You never asked me anything. You never talked to me. We never had a conversation. So that part is lonely. But the loneliness for me was that to some degree. But I wasn't the academician that Baxter is. Though I taught in Bible college for years, it was always part-time. It was not the way I made a living. So it was easy for me to say, I don't need this. I mean, I love it. I love being in the classroom. I love having conversations, particularly with college people in their 20s about these things, because some of the major changes in my life happened when I was in my 20s. Those were great years of questions.
A time of discovery in life.
Yeah, and you're beginning to own things for yourself. Mm-hmm. I love that, but I could always walk away from it. I'm a photographer. I'm going to go do photography, right? So, and I have my family. I have this life that doesn't really need to do this. So for me, it was, the crisis was, I don't know what I believe anymore. I don't know where this is going. I don't know how to answer anybody anymore about this. And
were you in a similar boat as Baxter and had felt alone in that?
Yeah, in some ways. In this way, what I knew was this is how it went for me. The first thing was, at some point I gave myself permission to ask questions, and before I hadn't. And if you're teaching, and I was, it's difficult to be teaching and then stand there and tell your students, well, I'm not really sure I believe in a hell like you guys think there is. I think it's a lot different than what the traditional view that you've been raised with and that I've taught you is.
That's not the traditional view.
Yeah.
It's the
modern traditional view. Traditional to me.
Yeah,
right?
but that's important to make.
It is.
No, majority today.
Yeah,
in
it's an important
North
distinction
America.
to make. That's true. But it was more personal crisis, and in the sense of feeling, a vagueness, a lostness, but being okay with it, because what I began to realize was I may not know what I believe yet, and the questions have grown, the answers have shrunk, and I'm actually okay with that, better than I was when I thought I had the answers, right? Yeah. But there's the element of, I know I'm not going to go back to that. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where this is headed, but I know I'm not going there because I've been there. And I spent a large part of my life there. And I'm not saying I have that all figured out either, but I know that it isn't sustainable for me. I know that this doesn't
create life.
Yeah. In the Bible words, there's no life in it. That's a pretty harsh comment, because I don't want to say that in a condemning way of my friends who are still in it, who think that it is life.
That's back to my question early on. That's not a statement about anybody.
Right.
It's about your quest for life.
Right. That's what I'm trying to
You drank here
find
and
out.
here and here, and you tried your best to make it work. And at some point you thought, well, this cannot be what Jesus was talking about.
Yeah.
Because it may work for somebody else, and that's fine. That's not the point.
Right.
The point is the personal quest to find to experience life. And then the Open Table Conference is really the same sort of parallel with me, is the discovery that there are bunches of people that have asked the same questions and are thrilled to be able to be in the room with people that have been trying to explore this and wrestle with it and have come to see this and this and this. And that's what thrills me. Mm-hmm. And that's the difference between the loneliness of the early days and all of a sudden you're thrown into the room with a Francois Dutoy, whose journey was extremely lonely too. Yeah. And then we meet, and I'm looking at a guy who's a New Testament scholar, and when we met in Memphis. I was taking him out to eat ribs. Me and Harry Phillips and Papa Smurf was in on that. Papa Smurf's the one that organized the whole thing. And Francois says, Baxter! He screams across the parking lot. Never met him. Baxter! Says the New Testament is screaming union. And they've translated it out. And he says, and I'm translating it back in. And we sat down and the four of us ate a slab of ribs apiece in the conversation over 3 hours. And just had this, I thought, how can this be a man from South Africa that even knows who I am? And it's like, this is amazing. And then that conversation, the overlap of networks is what's happening right now. John and I meet. Paul's got a network. John's got a network. I've got a network. Francois's got a network. Steve McVeigh's got a network. Richard Rohr's got a network. They're all overlapping now.
I have been noticing that very much because I listen to a lot of podcasts, check out YouTube a lot, and there seems to be a lot of overlap. And I was getting glimpses of the kind of stuff you were talking about, John. It's just where, like, why am I reading my Bible every day? Like, I have to. And I'm getting this nudge from the Holy Spirit, like, why don't you put your Bible down for a little while? You know what I mean? And just enjoy this life and what it's all about. Because if it's really about, an hour or two in the Bible every day for 3 years or more, which was my experience, right? Like, and you're getting sick and tired of it, but you just won't admit it, right? Because you think that's not Christian to do, to not like reading the Bible. It's just like little,
be faithful,
right? It's like little glimpses like that. It's like if I just do enough, then I'll get that feeling of excitement of for it again.
Yeah, the slippery slope that you're on there is you're actually going to slide down into the place to where you discover that the Apostle Paul and the Apostle John and the Apostle Peter encountered something that was so captivating and so beautiful. They were willing to give their energy and time and lives and die for this. And it's too beautiful for words, and they did a great job, and you've seen the same thing. And all of a sudden, I mean, I'm looking at the book of Ephesians now, not out of any duty.
Right.
I'm studying John not out of duty or fear that I'm disappointing to God. It's like I want to talk to somebody that's seen what I've seen, and they saw it, and they did a fantastic job. Yeah. And I'm like carefully looking at each word with honor and veneration and respect. Yeah. I mean, it's like a master painter, a Rembrandt, and I've seen something that I'm trying to paint, and I'm doing it by numbers, and I get to go stare at that painting for a while. But that's not coercion. Yeah. That's not have your quiet time or I'm not going to bless you. That is, I am in. Who's got something to say here to put on the table that's real and faithful to this?
Kester and I talk about this, but it's like, in the apostles, Peter and John in the book of Acts are brought before the religious leaders, and they just like, we can't stop talking about this. We finally got that. Like for the two of us, we're just sitting there one day, it's like, we can't stop talking about this. This is too beautiful for words, but we're going to spend the rest of our lives, desiring to actually want to talk about this.
And you don't even know that there's millions of people in the same boat that are one half a step behind you. Yeah. It's not about that. It's about what you've seen. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a room with all these other people. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, and it can go on for days.
This is why I cornered you and just yelled at you about atonement until you would listen to me and read some books, because it's just like, oh my gosh, like God's not a bloodthirsty monster. God doesn't function like pagan deities absorbing sacrifices.
See, I didn't get that at the time, because I asked him, I was like, if you can give one sermon to talk about or one Bible study, to go over, which one, like what topic would it be? And he was like, atonement. I'm like, that's kind of boring. That's like 2 years ago now, and within 7 months of us having that conversation, I'm like, yeah, me too.
Yeah. Maybe that gives it, to give it some context, I think we're talking about two its here. You talked, John, about moving from one pond to another, but there was a it we're referring to that was, I don't know how to characterize it, exclusion-based, a religious, work-based, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Some form of works, even if it's your own faith, saves you and appeases or somehow gets you in the good graces of an angry God. And the second it we were talking about, the it that was moved to, is a inclusion-based. Light has come into the world, and as you would say, Baxter, nobody got a vote on that.
A big Jesus base.
Yeah, I call them narratives. They're different narratives that are competing in our hearts and minds as to which one's correct. And there's more than two, but those are two that we're familiar.
The ones we're talking about, or you two were both talking about, transitioning out of.
Yeah.
Let me clarify something too. I have no network, and I don't mean that like in a woe is me thing. I was in a network, and when I stepped out of it, I had no network. Like, I didn't know he existed until Paul Young gave me a book. Have you ever heard of this guy? And I read it. And
what was it? Was it Across All Worlds?
Yeah, it was Across All Worlds. And
it's a fantastic book.
So I again, like you said, when you were trying to find me on the internet, like I can't even find a picture of this guy. And it's not like I'm trying to hide. It's just like, no, I get that I'm. He says, I'm surprised people knew who I was in South Africa. Well, I know there's nobody in South Africa that knows who I am. Why would they?
But that's what's not true anymore.
Well, it's changing. It's growing. Relationships develop, sure. But what I'm saying is I didn't bring a network into this that overlaps with anything. I'm grateful to be in the conversation. I am grateful to be in the network. And I know Baxter is too. I'm not saying that like I am and he's not. I don't mean it that way. I mean it in the sense of there's times where I look around and go, how did I get into this conversation? And the truth of it is I got into this conversation because I said, I read this, I'm going to do this thing and have these guys come and talk. I mean, that's what I did. That's what school theology was. I said, I've read this stuff and I'm going to get these guys to come and talk. And that's why I'm going to get in this conversation. Yeah. So I did. And I'm like, this is awesome. This is awesome to me.
Bill Wynn was kind of our in with this whole, with what I would call the network that I feel like I'm a part of.
Right.
And that's mostly the perichoresis guys. I mean, Randy Baxter's done such a fantastic job of keeping us connected online. But Bill was like my first. He opened the door to that world for me and Kester, so that we can get to know you guys. The fact that we're having this conversation today, like a few years ago, in my shame would have been like, why would these guys ever want to talk to me? Who am I? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And Kester had given me this book by a guy called Bishop Kenneth Myers, and he wrote a book called Salvation, How We Got It Wrong. And after I read through that 7-chapter book, I thought I was born again. Like just that experience of, like, it was the first time where I was convinced God is love, and He really actually does love every single person in this world. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with saying that to everybody I meet, you know, regardless of what I was even struggling through at that time about my view of hell and my view of judgment and all that kind of stuff. I was just so convinced God really does actually love everyone. But yeah, coming into the network with perichoresis and GCI and everything, like this year, it's like you, John, this is what you reminded me of, this is what I'm trying to get to, is that I was able to invite Bishop Ken to Richmond, a couple other guys to Richmond, have these gatherings, which is like, man, like if I can't, you know, do words justice by trying to explain this to you, at least we can like have gatherings and you guys can come hear these random folks. You know what I mean? It's like having like a gathering with like John MacMurray or Baxter Kruger, and they're like, who are these guys? You know, like my friends are just getting, you know, we're just getting together in my backyard around a fire pit, and someone's sharing their views, and then all these people just start having all these questions and everything. But I just felt like this feels like right at home. It's not some stage or whatever, you know, behind a mic that has less to do with the relationship and more to do with information, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And that sounds maybe a little judgy, but where it's like a roundtable discussion.
It is a roundtable discussion, but it's a roundtable discussion about the nature and character of God that we've discovered in Jesus, and we discovered that this is a long standing conversation in history that goes all the way back to Abraham, and we're part of this discussion, and it's not like irrelevant. And I see. I mean, there's the old liberal notion of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, and everything's going to be fine. And that's not what this is. This is the discovery of the Lord Jesus Christ as the creator and sustainer of all things. And He's become what we are. And He's entered into our world, entered into our darkness, and laid hold of us and drawn us together. And we're experiencing this, and we want to talk about this. So it's about Jesus and about His Father and about His anointing in the Holy Spirit. That's the thing that's drawing everybody together. It's not just a random conversation of, hey, wow, man, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to do a podcast, and we're going to talk about some cool things that are going on. I mean, and that's one of the things that I see. There's great strengths in your generation. I love your interest in unity. I love your interest in non-exclusivity. I love your emphasis, sort of inbuilt in your framework on relationality and community. I hate your laziness, and I don't mean you guys. I just mean you just think Google it and there it is. I mean, get off your ass and do the work to discover what's real. I'm not going to hand you the information. I want to see you do something, you know, because this is about life, and this is great. And so there's and sometimes I get a little bit. I'm not interested in doing another Hey Wow podcast. Isn't this cool? I got a new haircut and look at my new tennis shoes. This is about Jesus Christ, who's the creator of the entire cosmos. And it's about a bunch of people who are beginning to see that. And I want to be in that conversation. And that's exciting. And I will go anywhere in the world to be a part of that conversation. And if that's not what we're going to talk about, then I would rather watch bad golf on TV. But that's what is going on here. That's why John MacMurray and Paul Young and many of us are together, and we will crisscross the seas to be together, because this is the most breathtaking, exciting vision and reality we have ever encountered. And I wanted to be a part of it. And somehow we got to be in the middle of this. Yeah. So it's not like a, hey, wow, like, because I get invited to do blogs and stuff. And I'm like, well, what's the point? What are we talking about? I don't want to do a hey, wow blog. I mean, I don't care about that. I want to be with people who have seen Jesus, and he is blowing their minds. And they would do anything to get another glimpse and another insight, and to be able to say, man, this is the coolest, richest, most beautiful thing in the universe. It can solve the riddles of our world. Let's talk about this. That's what this is about. And that's why I'm in Richmond. That's why I came with Bill Wynn and Davina. And there's lots of people in this congregation, you guys and gal, and y'all are in this. I care about being a part of that, and I want to hear what MacMurray's going to put on. Look at what he did this weekend. He just rolled out this vision of the Old Testament that integrated stuff that I have never been able to integrate in 50 years of walking and wrestling and trying to figure this stuff out. And I want to challenge you. I want to challenge that generation. Get off of your butt. You go read Athanasius. You go find out what happened in the early church. And if you don't have the energy to do that, it's because you don't know you're dead. That's what I see in John MacMurray. He knows he's dead and dying. And he knows that Jesus is the answer. And he wants to find out. And I get to sit with him and talk with him. I will go across the country to sit and talk to him in that conversation.
He'll even go to Portland.
You're looking at a man that sold everything he had and drug his blessed wife to Scotland and froze to death for 5 years because I got a hunch that there's glory here and I'm going for it. Mm-hmm. And I'm supposed to just dial this off and spoon feed this. I'm like, I want to be in the conversation where people are crawling over things and hawking things, everything that they have, to be in the middle of this conversation, because that's where the life is. That's where the glory, that's where the songs are going to be written that they're going to be singing in 300 years, not just next week in the popular whatever. I mean, that's when they're going to be reading the books like Athanasius and the Brotherhood and Sisterhood through history, that those books are still printed because they're about Jesus. And it's real and it's beautiful. And they're going to be honored because they did a great job. And they're standing in the main tradition that goes back to Abraham. That's what I see your generation does not know about. And I'm like, yes, that's my job, is to throw that vision out in front of people. Then I want to be a part of that conversation with them. And at that point, it doesn't matter about ages.
I remember this time last year, I was still pretty hazy, trying to neurologically, I guess, connect all the dots in my head. You know what I mean? Because it made sense, but I'm like, I don't even know how to talk about this stuff. But at the retreat at Perichoresis in Mississippi.
Do retreats. That was a gathering.
A gathering. Well, you called it a retreat on the website.
I did not. I've never called it a retreat.
Randy Baxter did that.
I edit this out, James.
This part sucks.
So at the retreat, at the conference, at the gathering last year, I'm scared to talk about this stuff with people because, I know what they're going to think. You know what I mean? So I had that insecurity in me at the time, which thankfully now is no longer the case, which is why we're probably doing the podcast at this point and not last year or something like that. But at the time, I'm like, every time I seem to talk about this, I'm debating with somebody, they're hounding me with questions and they think I'm crazy. And I'm like, I don't want to be that guy that all my friends start to, seem like I'm alienating them or they're alienating me because, we don't agree on this stuff, which eventually I had to just kind of stop talking about it with certain friends so that I wouldn't alienate them in our friendship.
But what kept you going? What kept you pursuing that?
Yeah. So I remember a specific moment last year at the gathering. We had just come off the field from a quiet time. And I had just been so impacted by the Father in terms of my honesty and vulnerability about my shame that I had been feeling. And you asked Baxter if anybody wanted to share what they had experienced. And at that moment, it started raining, pouring rain on the tent. And I was just about to start sharing. And so as I'm sharing, you said, "Speak up really loud." And in that moment, there was two thoughts in my head. One, see, I can't talk about this, which is the insecurity talking. And the second thought was, Baxter actually wants to hear what I have to say, which was much more encouraging and from God. And from that moment on, I could remember there was a change happening on the inside where I'm like, all right, I can do this. I don't have to believe the lie that I don't know how to talk about it. I should be afraid that people would alienate me or think I'm crazy or anything like that. Because it really is, what I've experienced is way too beautiful. And over this weekend, during the Rethink God conference, you guys have been hitting on John 17 a lot. Like Baxter, John, and Paul, all three of you, have been talking about that chapter. And I share my story a lot with people, and part of my story is I was 26 and a half, sitting on my bed, half drunk, depressed, lonely, and wondering if I was ever going to see a day in life that actually had purpose in it, to see if I would ever stop feeling alone and sad all the time, because of what I'd done and where I thought my life was going and how it didn't seem to make sense. And I pick up the burgundy-colored NIV Bible that my youth pastor gave me, which somehow was still on my bookshelf. And I open up to John because I figured, okay, I think that's a gospel. I don't even know what that means, but it's the Gospel of John in red letters, I guess means Jesus. These are Jesus' words. And then I open up to the 17th chapter because my birthday is on the 17th. That's the only reason why. And I remember I start reading through that chapter and I get halfway through, and Jesus' words are, I don't just pray for them, but I also pray for those who will believe. It was the first tangible experience I had where I was like, he's talking about me. And then he goes on to say, I want them to be with me where I am, to behold my glory. And I was like, you want me. You of all people. I'd never heard, everything that I ever heard about Jesus was that he told some parables, he told some stories, he had some commandments, he told us how to live life a good way. And I had tried, and I'd been raised up in the church, and I'd been taught and disciplined, and I'd built a good foundation of what it probably meant to be a good person. But I know what I've done, I know how I felt, I know what I've been through. And for the first time, I thought, Jesus actually wants me. A few months into my new conversion life experience that's full of God and full of, the Bible and all this stuff that I was really enjoying. At the same time, I had to have a lot of healing being done, because every time I try to pray to the Father, it's like I'm walking on eggshells because of my own experience of my dad and my grandfather. And it took 5 months for me to actually get comfortable with praying to the Father. But the only reason I got there was because Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And so it was Jesus walking me through that. Not anybody else, but just Jesus alone. And I was wondering, I was like, does anybody else have this experience at all? When it says that, eternal life is that they may know you, the Father. And I'm wondering, what are we talking about in our churches? What am I going through every Sunday, to learn how to be a better future husband or father or a better friend, Isn't this what it's all about, to come to know this God? And I studied mostly in Reformed circles of theology. That's where I was studying the most until I met Kester. And he's bringing some stuff that I was way too insecure to think about or whatnot. I mean, I remember going on YouTube and seeing guys like Andre Robbie and Francois, and I'm like, these guys must be the crazy ones. I ain't going to listen to any of their stuff. And now I am. But John 17, yeah, like you guys talked about that a lot this week or this weekend, and
There's a reason
that's a huge, yeah, that personal conversation that Jesus is having with his Father, and how he's so excited, in this crazy dark time, like just before he's about to go to the cross. At that time, he's excited that the mission is about to be fully accomplished, I guess. And he's like, we've done it together, Dad, And I'm like, there's something more to this than just study, be a part of a small group, go to Sunday service, go tell people about Jesus, get them saved.
Jesus is the one who created all things, and he knows that we don't know his Father, and we're depressed and sad and broken and self-centered and protective and hiding. and creating chaos and hell in our lives because we don't know what he knows. When he hears the Father say, "You are my beloved Son, in whom my soul delights." And he can't bear that. And he will never bear that. He will never tire until we see what he sees. That's the gospel. He crossed all worlds to find us, and he refuses to allow us to be in his creation, destined for life and to be perishing. The people don't know that that's what Jesus came to do. They think that he came to somehow satisfy an angry God who was disgusted with us. He came and laid down his life, and he would do it again and again and again if necessary in order to bring us to see and to know what he knows. That's it. All he wants of you, James, is that you see his Father and know his heart like he does, and then go play golf in it, go brew beer in it, go be a chef in it, go be a dad, a friend in it, go fix a sewer line in it. That's the kingdom. And we have so botched it in the West that we have several generations upon generations now that think that all Jesus is religiosity, that everybody knows doesn't work and nobody's willing to face. It is so much more beautiful than that.
I'm really encouraged to hear what you just said about John 17, all of it, but specifically this part. So I pick up John 17 and I read, and Jesus is praying for me, and I realize, oh my gosh, he's praying for me. And then he says, I want them to be with me. And you go, oh my gosh, Jesus wants me. Because in our knee-jerk reaction, and it's an appropriate one, to the complete exclusive way of knowing God was this informational path through knowledge and education and reason and rationalization in the West. The knee-jerk response, and like I said, rightly so, to that has been to move away from it, because a personal revelation of God requires an experience of the person, okay? But you encountered and had an encounter, and the scriptures were the instrument in that. Now, for someone else, it may be they see a deer on the lawn. I have no idea. But so I like that, because I don't want to see us make the mistake of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. We have pulled away from this emphasis, this almost exclusive emphasis on this educational, informational model, that this is, you have to believe the right thing in order for this to all be right. Because we're hearing a different narrative and we're encountering Jesus. But the scriptures, I think, are still inspired. I still think it's a means by which God communicates to us.
And they still inspire.
Yeah. So it's cool for me. I say that particularly, James, because to the younger generation, again, teaching, having taught in college for a long time and working with a lot of people in your generation, I find a lot of them pulling away from it. And I get it. I get why. And I want to say, whoa, before you walk out of the room, maybe we're overreacting here a little bit. Yeah. And hopefully, as an older man, I can bring that wisdom to say, I've been there. I know what you're talking about. I had to put my Bible down for a long time, but don't throw it out, kind of thing. So it's really exciting for me to hear you say that.
It's cool because going through just a lot of legalistic behavior in my life, I don't regret that at the same time, because I still came through and am at where I'm at today. And that somehow God was able to use that in so many different ways to help teach me what I know now. But even more so than that, it's brought me to a place where I can encourage others sometimes, that if they're so burdened and stressed out by how quote-unquote difficult it is to live this Christian life, or whatever that they're going through, that I could tell them, maybe it's okay to just chill out, relax, and just learn what it means to live loved for a little while, rather than, sign up for the next seminary or, or try to become a youth pastor or something like that, or go and volunteer in all these programs and ministries or what have you. Maybe it'll be okay, just relax for a while, which I think is what the Apostle Paul did for a few years. I don't know. I think he had to deconstruct a lot, but I think he got to chill out a little bit and live loved.
And I find an affinity with your story because my journey's similar. Like I was talking to a guy this weekend that says, when people say things, I want to see them footnote it because they got it from somewhere. And my story is such that I spent years and years in the Gospel of John, and I read nobody. I hadn't heard of T.F. Torrance. I knew who Bart was. I never read Bart. Didn't know who Baxter was. I didn't know Darrell Johnson. I didn't know, on and on and on. Grants. I didn't know any theologians. I hadn't read anybody. It was all me interacting with the Bible and wrestling and talking to God about what I was reading and not understanding, and knowing that it was kind of pushing back on the people that I had read in this other narrative and not knowing where to go with it. And, so I didn't even know these people existed. I didn't even know that there were people out there saying this. And so it's a little bit different for me. And for a lot of people, that wasn't like, Bill's was like someone handed him a book and he read 3 books, or was it 3 books or parts of books in one day pretty much, and it rocked his world. Mine was like 8 years, 9 years in the Bible, and I wasn't talking to anybody, reading anybody.
That's the difference between this generation and the next, though. We've been able to hand it on in the Spirit.
Yeah.
And they can see it much more quickly, or at least get a hunch about it.
Yeah. And now that I have read those guys, I love them. I'm absolutely like, this is wonderful. I love reading T.F. Torrance.
You're not alone now.
Yeah. And people like T.F. Torrance who are smarter than me, that have articulated this in ways that it's at a level that I'm not at that level, and I love being able to see that because it helps me understand and gives me a greater appreciation and a growth. So,
well, I'm going to challenge you on the thing about, because T.F. Torrance is a brilliant man, and I can speak to that because I've read everything he wrote. But what I heard you do yesterday on the Old Testament, I've never read him do.
Yeah, because that wasn't his particular thing that he studied and spent a lot of time on. He was working.
Take the compliment, John.
I'm taking the compliment. I can't.
He can't.
But it's a true observation.
Is that why you have to preface everything with "I'm not being self"?
Well, because they keep telling me that, and I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just telling you, it's a real observation.
John has not yet come to the realization that the Holy Spirit is sharing profound insights with him, and he gets to speak them out in public. And he did that this weekend. I've been around for 57 years, and I have read a bunch of stuff on the Old Testament trying to figure it out. And T.F. Torrance's book, Mediation in Christ, is the single best book I've ever read on the mediation of Christ, and it includes the Old Testament, includes Israel. But what John rolled out off the top of his head, and he didn't even know he's supposed to do a lecture. He walks up there flat, like, oh, okay, what am I going to do? Rolls this out, and I'm looking around the room with these pastors thinking, man, you got to be kidding me. So I'm like, I'm on a mission to get him to write that down, so then that becomes our base Old Testament vision. Then the next year we come back, and John's going to teach on the book of Hebrews, and he and I are going to teach on John, and Paul's going to dap in and drop in all these stories that integrates all this. Then we're going to get to look at Matthew and Mark and Luke. Then we're going to get to look at Paul and have this huge biblical picture, because now at last we have all these people that actually care about the story of the Bible because it's our story.
I get this way with Kester all the time too.
You were going to say
I tell him he's brilliant. He's just like, it's just an observation. It's just that similar response, man.
Might be a little more
it's called shame for all of us, because none of us believe that we're actually in a conversation with God. We're learning that we are.
Okay, let me clarify that. Let me clarify that a little bit. I lived so long in thinking that I was better than other people, that I'm afraid of that because I haven't learned how to deal with that yet. I'm learning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good. And I lived so long thinking I was a dummy that anything that I saw could not possibly be of value until I turn around and I feel like I'm a badger and my job is to dig. And I dig, and every now and then I come up to get a breath of fresh air, and there's like 1,000 people sitting around talking about all the stuff that I've dug up. And I'm like, what? You want to talk about this? For real? I'm like, okay. So I'm like, I'm in. Let's talk about it. And then Bill Wynn shows up, Tim Purcell shows, all these people start showing up with these great questions. We have these 4-day-long conversations, and I'm like, I thought I was the only one that was interested in this. That's beautiful. And that's engaging that engages me at a soul level deep down inside. And I'm like, that's worth getting out of bed for. That's worth getting up and going to work tomorrow. That's worth going back one more time and digging some more because this is real and this is good and this is beautiful. So to be able to say to Paul Young, have you not read Athanasius? Well, no, I hadn't read him. I said, you wrote to Shack and you didn't read, you're not getting this from Athanasius? You didn't get this from T.F. Torrance? He said, no. I said, you not got this from George MacDonald? He says, no. I said, I love that. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? So I'm like filing books and stuff to him, like, because that was not his journey, but he came to the same place. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you've not read T.F. Torrance and you wrote to Shack. You never heard J.B. Torrance say forgiveness is prior to repentance. That was my first question to him. So I had the joy of being able to say, Paul, go read Athanasius on the Incarnation, or go read Athanasius against the Arians, and go read George MacDonald. I sent him a copy of George MacDonald's sermons. I'm like, dude's going to just pee in his pants when he realized he's not the first one that was not his journey. He did not come to this theologically like I did. He came to this out of hell. Not theological hell like I was in.
Just a quick side note, because I know I'll forget this later, and then we can get to Kester. Kester's been dying to ask a question.
I couldn't be more patient, man.
Earlier today, Baxter, you gave the last session, and then you set up communion. I mean, it's so much more than that. But just for the sake of not having to provide too much context, you gave space and time for people to come up and just have a conversation with the Father, Son, Holy Spirit around the 3 chairs that you had set up. And I fought so hard because I didn't want to go up there, because I knew what that would mean for me. And there's been
What would mean what?
That's what I'm going to explain to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're not gonna get
It's Father's Day, and I've had issues with my dad over like the last year, and talking to him a lot less, and setting up boundaries, and needing space to work things out in my head about just a relationship I've had with my dad all my life. And thinking about that, the stories you guys had to share about fatherhood, your fathers, and so on and so forth, that at the same time me wrestling with like what it looks like in my life to be more vulnerable, more honest, more vocal, more true to myself when it comes to my own emotions. Like Paul sharing the story about expressing his anger one day. I didn't want to go up there because I knew what that would mean. I was literally like trying to glue myself emotionally to my seat. And I saw you, Baxter, and Paul up there towards the tail end of that time. And I was like, okay, I'll go up and sit there. But I know if I go up and sit there, I'm sitting in the Father's chair, because that's where I need to be. And I go up there and I sit in the Father's chair, and I'm just cringing, trying to fight off the tears and everything. But in my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, the only thing I had to say to God in that moment was, you know what you have to do, and you know how hard it's going to be, which is to break down my walls break down any barrier that gets in the way of me and my relationship with God, my relationship with myself, and my relationship with other people. So I know this doesn't probably relate to a lot of the stuff we're talking about just now, but it's a side note. I wanted to share that with you guys because that was a powerful moment.
It relates.
How is it a side note? I mean, it is the point.
You've ingrained this in me. I go everywhere.
What about
I talk about anything and everything. Yeah, but that's just yet another tangible experience of just being in this relationship with God, and knowing that I've come to a place where I can trust the Father of all people.
To sit in his chair.
To sit in his chair and say, you know what you need to do, and you know how hard it's going to be, but I know that you can do it. Whatever that's supposed to look like. If my Father and I reconcile, if ways in which I can love myself more and love others more, ways that I can be less cynical and bitter in life, ways in which I can relax while I'm growing, So it's all that stuff.
All of the jungle. The jungle that you see in front of you, that you imagine in front of you of getting through this process. All of that was done when you walked from behind the camera to sit in that chair. That was done inside of you. Now it's going to just grow, and it will expand. And the difficulty that you imagine, all of that was between you and the chair. And you've already done it. This is, that's really clear to me. And I don't know your journey, and I don't know your story, except insofar as I can relate on a human level and with dad issues and things like that. But to walk from where you were in your mind, whether it's real or not in reality, but in your mind it was real, and you went and sat there in Papa's seat. The work's done. It's just going to bubble up and go. There's no jungle from here out. There's pain, but pain is not the jungle. And you will be able to embrace the painful parts because you sat in that chair metaphorically and been embraced by the Father, and you know it's good. For whatever reason, when I was a little boy, I read about Balboa crossing the Isthmus of Panama and discovering the Pacific Ocean. And it had to be one of the only two books I read until I went to college. I had a vision when I was reading that book of what it was like for Balboa to cross the jungle, to fight the snakes and the leeches and the ticks and the animals and all the stuff, because he had a hunch that there was something breathtaking in front of him and he would not be denied. And I stood with him on the beach. A little boy. I mean, I'm 11 years old or something reading this thing. And I saw the Pacific. When you stand on the beach and the jungle is behind you and there's nothing as far as you can see to the right and to the left and in front of you but ocean and sunshine. And it's like that was a picture of I look back now and think that's what Jesus was calling me to. And don't pretend that the jungle is the beach, because the beach is real. Keep going till you get to the beach. And to me, when I'm sitting, you went through the jungle and you sat on the beach, and you're going to get to experience more and more of that as who you are. That's who the Father is. That's the life that Jesus has come to give us. It's peace. It's like freedom today to just be. I don't have to work up something. I don't have to fight this. The jungle is an illusion inside of our own minds anyway. It's not real. It's real to us, but it's not real.
I appreciate that.
And now to segue off something deeply personal. Chop this up in editing.
Yeah, I'll put a song right here.
Start singing, please.
You have a quote from Bill Wynn on this one?
So the conversation a few times has turned to this generational thing, which is interesting. I was just thinking about. I'm a bit of a student of history, but not American Christian history, like all the revivals and the groups that came over. I don't know a ton about that, but in the broadest sense, it seems like for 250 years in this country, we've had this anemic gospel that either features a Jesus who's going to beg and plead with you to let him into your heart and make him Lord of something, or a monstrous God who arbitrarily picks and chooses whom he'll favor. And for, a dozen generations, that narrative has been passed down and proliferated and has built huge churches, and millions of people have accepted that narrative and told their children about it, maybe with varying degrees of, willingness. But now we're on the cusp of, I don't know the statistics, but becoming like a lot of Western Europe is, like a post-Christian nation. Like this gospel, I don't know if people have gotten tired of the religious dutyism or what's happening, but the timing of this is people are just saying no. 90% of kids raised in church are just piecing out. They're tired of it. And then at the same time, these theologians like Barth and Torrance, who can be difficult, inaccessible, to the laity in some ways, hard to read, or at least challenging in their ideas, are being reinterpreted, and the stories are being retold by people in plain language, and this conversation is springing up all over the world, South Africa, Australia, Europe, America, and it's it seems like an amazing work of the Spirit is that almost everyone is dumping this story, at least the people my age who grew up in it. And almost all of them that are dumping the story are also leaving the church. And then a few people who hang around and stay in church grip really tightly to the story, or the narrative. But then there's this conversation that just keeps spreading, and anyone willing to have this conversation always seems enamored with it, about this more beautiful picture of a more kind and loving and amazing God. And there's not a question there. It's a crazy thing.
It is a kind and loving and most amazing God, but I think that something that doesn't really get talked about in this equation is that we live in a secular culture. Europe is way ahead of us. Australia is way ahead of us in terms of living out the secularity of that. Mm-hmm. When you dismiss the Trinity as irrelevant, you bite cosmic loneliness. And for a while, you can entertain yourself to death. But in the end, the argument is getting out of bed and being present to enjoy your family and your friends. Because if there is no God, and I don't mean G-O-D, if there is no Father, Son, and Spirit, there is no Trinitarian life to be a part of, then in the end, there is no reason for me to be here. And so for the first 40 years, I can throw myself into, let's make money and get a house on the beach and live large. But man, the demons come, because after 40, you start thinking, it's a shift, maybe 50. But you start then thinking, how much time do I have left? And all this is not in front of you because you've done it. Now, it's how much time do I have left, and what is the point of all this? And there is no point in a secular framework. I've said this many times in discussions with people who are evolutionary, and they just, dude, there is no reason for you to be here. And I saw this when I was teaching theology at Aberdeen University. There was a graveyard, an ancient graveyard, right across the street from the university, and I would sometimes, on those rare sunny days, I would go and walk in the graveyard and just kind of look around and pace and think. And I came to this gravesite that said, "The march of time will see that you are here with me, and you too will be forgotten." After you turn 40 or 50, that cuts your guts out. Because the great beach house that you built, and all the lake, and all the things that you've done for your family and all that, you suddenly realize it has no eternal weight. It has no eternal value. It may be good for a generation, and maybe if we're lucky, our grandchildren will have a painting of us on the wall saying, "Granddad built this." But after that, we have no value unless we are a part of something magnificent. And we don't have that in our culture. You see this in our politics. You see this in the way that we orient news, sound bites. Everybody's trying to create meaning, and it has no meaning unless it's part of something that's real. And if there's no God, there's no Father, Son, and Spirit, then it's not real. So it's all smoke screens. And after a couple of generations of that, you get tired of the smoke screens. It's like nobody's listening. And that's where we are right now in the United States. Nobody's paying attention to what's going on politically because nobody believes the sound bites. It's just like, so there's a deeper reality that I think our culture is beginning to clamor for that. What's real? What matters? Is there a narrative here that doesn't see the United States as the kingpin for 200 years in what's called Western civilization, but actually sees human history as going somewhere, and we are a part of that, and so am I, and so is the garbage collector. He and she is a part of something that really matters. That's what we have with us as Christians in the larger narrative of the Trinitarian vision that is absent in our culture. And people are feeling that. They're not yet quite ready to consider Jesus as an alternative to that. But Paul Young shared with me a book the other day. I don't remember the name of it. John, you might, but it's written by a guy who writes for USA Today, and he was saying a secular.
Tom Crottenmaker.
That's it. But do you remember the title of the book?
I don't remember the title.
It's not out yet. Paul's going to write a blurb for it. And he was just saying it's a man who is a secularist who realized that what Jesus was saying is really important. It's got value. It's got meaning. And it's the only thing that could save our civilization because it gives a hermeneutic. It gives a narrative. It gives us meaning for ordinary events. And the North American evangelical model today about pray to receive Jesus, go to heaven when you die, doesn't speak to that. The Trinitarian vision, the ancient vision of Abraham and Moses and Israel and Jesus and the apostles and the early church, which we lost in the West, but we're recovering, it speaks to the meaninglessness of our culture. And I had a young guy, I was out west, and he was a young whippersnapper type, just graduating from seminary, and had been trained in postmodern thought. And he didn't like my conviction. He said, you speak with authority. You speak like you know. And you speak, how do you know these things? And he was questioning me, and I said, brother, I said, I'm not trying to convince you, but I will have a conversation with you when you turn 40 and you don't know how to get out of bed because there is no meaning in your life. And we'll have this conversation then. I said, what gets me out of bed in the morning and what I'm fired up about and I'm more excited about right now than I've ever been in my entire life at 57 is Jesus. Now, that's exciting. I'm like, this is real. This is beautiful. This is good. This wins. This is like, I want to tell everybody. I want everybody to be in the conversation, and I will go anywhere on earth to help if people want to talk about this. I don't care about soundbite Christianity, and I don't care about the big choir and the dazzling side effects and the, like going to speak somewhere where they need to know 6 months in advance what you're going to talk about, how long you're going to talk, so they can have the lighting effects right.
One of the early impressionists, maybe Albert Camus, I think it was him, said, the only question that matters in philosophy is why shouldn't I kill myself? And like that made me like, I don't know any other answer than the Father, Son, and Spirit.
Another question that piggybacks on that is, why should I not kill you, take your money, and your wife? So how does the evolutionary philosopher answer that question? I mean, it's just not about morality. This is about, because that's not life. But how do you know it's not life? This is where we've just conceded so many things, and all of this is coming up in generational, it's coming up in terms of hunger. My father, John's father, had to conquer. They had to build the house and the church and the hospital and the white picket fence. And that was their dream, and they did it. And they busted their butts and made it happen. And so we grew up with the house and the white picket fence. Issues psychologically and spiritually that my parents didn't have time to deal with because they were trying to conquer and provide, in my generation, are coming up. But in your generation, they're really coming up. It's like, what's the point of all of this?
Plus, the access to information is so easy.
Yeah,
and
that's
so plentiful. I think, one of the things, I want to suggest something because I don't know. I mean, I'm referring to your original kind of observation. It's speculative. The two narratives that you talked about, and the one that you mentioned that you feel like has been the predominant voice historically over the last couple decades or last couple generations or whatever. I think, again, I go to this idea of how God accommodates us as the human race. And we wanted to talk reason. We wanted to talk rationality. So this is the gospel we came up with. And he said, okay, I'll talk that. There were millions of people that came to know Jesus in those years. I mean, I don't agree with the gospel that Billy Graham preached, but God was partnering with Billy Graham, and millions of people came to know Jesus because that man, for whatever reason, stayed true to trying to let people know about Jesus. Although the message was all about reason and rationality, and his message changed. If you look at the history of Billy and what he said, and as he got older, it morphed. My point is that I think historically, we were trying to have a conversation over here and trying to come to know God this way. And God's like, this isn't the best way. And you've forgotten something, but I'll still meet you here. I'll talk this language. I'll help you through this. And as I do it, I'm going to create a hunger in you for meaning, because this isn't going to give meaning. This isn't going to do it. And I'm going to stir this up so that there's going to be people that begin to say, wait a minute, and they begin to question. And he says, this is who I am. You lost who I am. It got eclipsed. That's Baxter's phrase. It was eclipsed. It was lost, so to speak, for a period of time. So I think that might have truth to it, because I've observed that in my own life, in my own experience. I seem to see it in the way God dealt with Israel in the Old Testament. Yes. And so I think it's almost like this is the way that God is, like, again, if the question is, how does God reconcile an entire race of people, his children, that don't want to be reconciled? Like, he's the last person they want to be friends with, right? Because they're scared to death of him. How does he do that without violating their will, violating the very humanity that he gave them and made them to be? Well, it's this incredibly long road of process, right? That he has to talk our language, even when we're talking like complete idiots, right? Which we do a lot. In your observation, like I said, it's speculative, but I wonder if that's not part of what's going on here in terms of even what we're seeing. And what the fun part for me is, as now that I'm getting into the latter part of my life, I am. That's a reality. I've lived more life than I will live. I'm not going to live to 124. That's a pretty sure thing. So I look at it and I go, well, I've seen this happen in my life. I've lived long enough that I've seen this happen. And it seems to me that I'm seeing it happen in more than just a personal level. It seems to be happening at the tribal level, the community level, group level, race level, global level. And that, for me, is hopeful. It tells me something again about the nature of the Father, Son, and Spirit. They are relentless. They will not abandon. No matter how long you want to talk craziness, they'll talk craziness. But they'll get you. It'll come around. So,
and that's one of the most beautiful things to me. I saw it in T.F. Torrance. Here's a man that's 80 years old, and he's still fired up about Jesus. And he's not manufacturing some soundbite. He's not trying. He doesn't care about
his
money.
sentences are longer than the evening news.
He does paragraph. Dude is fired up. J.B. Torrance is still excited as an old man. Now, what is it that they know that gives them that kind of energy? Because that's real. Because I've lived long enough to go through the process to where I don't know why to get out of bed tomorrow. And I know I get out of bed to take care of my family. Well, that works for a while too. But it doesn't work that long. And I'm looking at grown men. And in my journey, that was, I'm not minimizing women. I'm just saying I'm looking at grown men who are still excited, who are just chomping at the bit to be in the middle of a conversation. Well, what is it that they know? And they know Jesus. And they know the meaning of Jesus' significance for global cosmic history. And it's not that they believe that. They know it. That's where we're headed. That's the point, is that the Christian community doesn't have to argue politically. We don't have to put the best sound bites and the best dazzling slideshows out there. The game is who's alive, who's excited, who is willing to play, to rest, to lay down their life. That's the argument. And that's what Jesus says in John 17, that they may know the love for one another. Who can give their life for others? Who can reach into their savings account and give it away for the benefit of another person? Because they trust something much bigger, because they know something much bigger is at work.
Here's another thing that occurs to me, and this goes back to what Baxter was saying earlier, and it's the generational thing. If we're saying that eternal life is a relationship, then information, no matter how quickly it's learned or no matter what amount of it you have, is not the solution. Okay? You actually have to experience the other. And because we're fallen, because we're blind, the human race, it seems like there is no way around this, that in order to get out of my blindness, there is going to be pain. It just doesn't seem like there's any way around it. Education can't solve this problem. It has to be an encounter. It has to be an experience. And so pain's going to be involved. And when you're younger or when you haven't lived as long, maybe there's not as much. For some people, they're experiencing pain and suffering from the get-go in their life. And those are people I want to talk to. I want to hear how this has shaped them and what they've learned and what they bring from it. But again, my journey was educational, a lot of it, but the encounters that I had with God, I mentioned one of them this morning, the process of becoming a father and the process of fathering my children was an encounter for me, ongoing with God. Another one was through a painful issue with someone close to me, where I felt there was personal betrayal of the deepest kind. And at that moment, a major domino for me or a major issue for me was the issue of justice. In that suffering, in that betrayal, in that pain, in that hurt, God was gracious enough to say, okay, I'm going to take what you're struggling and learning intellectually, educationally, and you're going to encounter this. But it's going to be painful. But that's the way it has to be, because it's painful coming out of the dark into the light. It hurts your eyes. You say, take it away. You know what I'm saying? And that was my journey into what real justice was. And it was a domino that just pulverized, and then the dominoes started falling after it. That was an encounter for me. I can remember clearly on multiple occasions I would be reading George MacDonald about justice, going through this period in my life, walking downstairs to my wife in bed, waking her up, kneeling by the bed with her in bed, and reading her things from George, and her trying to listen because I woke her up, and just crying on my knees beside the bed with my wife of how beautiful of what he was saying, and how far away from that was not in my heart. What was in my heart was vengeance, was retribution, but I was calling it justice. And just God saying, we're going to transform that. The only way we're going to get this is relationally. It's the only way we're going to get this. So I think that's a piece that for us who are older need to encourage the younger generation with, like, you just need to know and be aware that this is going to be part of it. This is going to be part of the journey. If it's not already, it will be.
What's the pain?
Yeah, because the growth, the knowing what life is, okay? Eternal life is knowing the Father. And that knowing of the Father is not an educational or informational knowing. It's a relational knowing. Again, it doesn't exclude information, but it's a relational knowing. So it's going to require
Jesus
an encounter.
learned what it meant to be a son by the things he suffered.
Yeah. There's a quote from the Bible.
I think that's a good place to quit.
Amen.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's turn that AC back on. Thanks, guys.
You're welcome, James. Thank you.
Something useful in the midst of that.
Wow, all right. What an episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope y'all had as much fun listening to that as we did recording it. Our goal here, always at the Trinity Happy Hour, is that you find the things you listen to encouraging, interesting, something that gives you pause for reflection about your own life and your own beliefs, because these things we talk about have given us a lot of pause to reflect on.
John MacMurray can be found at opentableconference.com. And if you're looking for more of Baxter Kruger's work online, he can be found at perichoresis.org. Now that's a long word, so let me spell it out for you. perichoresis.org.
So thanks again for tuning in. Check us out at trinityhappyhour.com. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram if you just type in Trinity Happy Hour. While you're at the website, we would love if you signed up for our email news list. That's where we send out announcements, links to new episodes in all the different formats. So yeah, if you haven't yet subscribed to our show on iTunes, if you're on Android, you can check us out on Google Play Music. There's a podcast section on there. Pocket Catcher, Pocket Cast, I believe. There's a lot of apps out there. Stitcher. So check us out through any of those if you want to subscribe and get our shows sent directly to your phone. If you have subscribed on iTunes or Google Play or Pocket Cast or anything, please give us a review, put some stars on there. We are in the process right now of trying to increase our engagement with you, the listener. We would love your feedback, we'd love your thoughts, we'd love your critiques, we'd love your ideas, we'd love your questions to help our forming and guiding of the show. We have a million episode ideas of what we want to release and talk about, but we would love to hear from you on what you want us to talk about, who you'd like us to interview, and what questions you have. So We can always be found at trinityhappyhour.com, and email, we're at trinityhappyhour@gmail.com. So send us an email, tell us what you think, ask us a question. We cannot wait to hear back from you guys. So thanks again so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.